Imagine a world swallowed by ice. No cities, no warmth, no lights flickering in the dark. Just endless storms screaming across frozen plains, nights that stretch 20 hours long, and winds howling through the hollow bones of mammoths that once ruled the earth. In this world, every breath burned like frost, and every sunrise was a battle won. The earth itself was a graveyard of giants, and survival was the only language life understood. 45,000 years ago, our species entered this frozen stage, the Cro-Magnon. They were not yet farmers or builders of kingdoms. They were wanderers, hunters, dreamers, carrying fire through a world intent on extinguishing it. Europe was not empty when they arrived. Another kind of human already called it home, the Neanderthal, powerful, stocky, and adapted to the cold, a rival shaped by a different path of evolution. For nearly 5,000 years, these two kinds of humans shared the same lands, the same caves, the same desperate winters. Sometimes they fought, sometimes they traded, and sometimes they intertwined. Their bloodlines crossed beneath the auroras of an eternal winter, creating echoes that still live within us today. This was not just a clash of species, it was a meeting of destinies. What followed was a story of strength and ingenuity, of compassion and cruelty, of survival at the very edge of extinction. It is the story of how one species didn't simply endure the Ice Age, they mastered it. The rise of the Cro-Magnon was not inevitable. It was earned one frozen breath at a time. Because this is not just their story. It's ours, the story of how we became human. They were built for a world that wanted them dead. The Cro-Magnon were not fragile wanderers shivering beneath furs. They were the athletes of the Ice Age. The average man stood around 5'11", broad-shouldered and straight-backed, his frame carved by generations of cold and hunger. The women, averaging around 5'4", carried the same strength in smaller form, resilient, compact, capable of enduring endless winters. Their shoulders were nearly a quarter wider than ours, their bones thicker, heavier, and their muscles packed dense beneath the skin. Every inch of their bodies spoke one word: survival. Their bones tell the story better than any legend. The clavicles stretched long, giving them powerful leverage for throwing spears or pulling down massive prey. Their arms and legs were not built for speed, but for power, each movement a balance between endurance and force. To modern eyes, they would not look primitive at all. In fact, if one of them walked among us today wearing a parka and boots, you might think they were an Olympic decathlete, strong, agile, confident. Their bodies could rival modern athletes, not by training but by necessity. Evolution had turned them into living engines of endurance. In a world where food could vanish for weeks and the cold could flay the flesh from bone, excess fat was a liability, but muscle was life insurance. Their dense frames stored warmth, their blood carried more oxygen, and their lungs expanded to drink in the thin, frozen air. Unlike their Neanderthal cousins, who were stockier and built for short bursts of strength, Cro-Magnons balanced power with agility. They could chase, climb, and strike with precision. That flexibility was their advantage, the ability to adapt, to change, to survive not just one kind of challenge, but all of them. Yet they were not beasts. Their faces were strikingly familiar, flat, symmetrical, framed by rounded skulls and clear chins. They looked like us because, in truth, they were us. The same spark of humanity shone in their eyes, the same quiet intelligence behind every measured step. Modern for them didn't mean technology or comfort. It meant adaptability. It meant using every resource, bone, muscle, mind, to stay alive in a world that offered no mercy. In the Ice Age, strength wasn't about dominance or pride. It was the currency of existence. To stand tall against the cold was to defy extinction itself. And every Cro-Magnon who walked that frozen earth carried within their frame the blueprint of who we would become, the first true humans, shaped by endurance, refined by ice, and destined to rise above it. Strength alone was never enough in the Ice Age. To survive, you needed something deeper, a will that refused to die. Among the fossils of Cro-Magnon, one skeleton tells that story better than any words ever could. Archaeologists call him Cro-Magnon 1, the first of his kind ever found. His bones were scarred with tumors, his skull pitted by disease. By all logic, he should have died young, yet the evidence tells a different tale. He lived beyond 40 years, an eternity, in a world where most never saw 30. Every mark on his bones is a record of pain, endured, and conquered. He walked through suffering and kept walking. His body carries the memory of countless battles, not just against beasts or the cold, but against his own frailty. Fractures had healed, vertebrae had fused together from repeated strain. Each injury bore witness to the relentless grind of survival. But more remarkable than the scars themselves is what they reveal about his people. He did not survive alone. Someone must have tended his wounds, shared food when he could no longer hunt, and stayed beside him while he recovered. In a world that devoured the weak, the Cro-Magnon cared for their wounded. That compassion was not weakness, it was strategy. It kept knowledge alive, preserved experience, and bound them together against the cold. Modern science confirms what those bones whisper. Cro-Magnon communities were tightly knit. They shared shelter, food, and protection. They buried their dead with care-painted symbols of farewell and watched over one another through illness and age. Beneath the raw power that carried them through the Ice Age was a tenderness that made them truly human. They endured not only because their bodies were strong, but because their hearts refused to abandon one another. When you look at the fossil of Cro-Magnon 1, you don't see a relic of the past, you see a mirror of us. The same endurance that carried him through endless winters still burns quietly inside every person who refuses to give up. Resilience wasn't a choice. It was the only way to live. In the frozen theater of the Ice Age, brute strength alone couldn't feed a tribe. Intelligence, sharp, patient, and relentless became the Cro-Magnon's greatest weapon. They were not just hunters. They were engineers of survival. The spears and clubs of their ancestors evolved into precision instruments. They carved stone into blades, thin as paper, balanced to split bone and hide. They shaped antler and ivory into deadly extensions of their own limbs. And then came innovation, the atlatl, a simple spear thrower that turned muscle into mechanics, doubling the reach and force of a hunter's throw. With that single invention, the distance between man and prey grew wider, and their odds of living another day rose sharply. These weren't random creations. Each tool carried the marks of purpose and calculation. Archaeologists call their era the Aurignacian period, the dawn of technology made not from desperation but design. Their tools were lighter, sharper, stronger. Their minds had begun to think like engineers, reshaping nature itself into instruments of will. But tools were only half the story. The real genius of Cro-Magnon lay in their strategy. They didn't charge blindly into battle against beasts 10 times their size. They planned. They studied the seasons, watched herds migrate, mapped the flow of rivers, and turned the land into a weapon. Entire groups worked together to drive reindeer toward cliffs or trap mammoths in narrow valleys where escape was impossible. They built snares, nets, and hidden pits, and when the hunt began, every movement was deliberate, a symphony of coordination played out against the endless white. Even the predators of that age cave, lions, leopards, and bears, found themselves hunted in turn. The Cro-Magnon were not intimidated by power. They learned from it. They mimicked the stealth of the cat, the patience of the wolf, and used those lessons to become the apex predator of all. To them, the world was not chaos. It was a puzzle, a battlefield, a classroom. They observed. They adapted. They refined. And in doing so, they became something new, not just survivors, but thinkers. The ice may have tested their bodies, but the hunt sharpened their minds. Every weapon they crafted, every strategy they mastered, was a declaration that intellect could conquer even nature itself. They studied the world the way a general studies a war map, with precision, with purpose, and with imagination. And in that study, they discovered the secret that would define all of human history. Survival doesn't belong to the strongest, but to the most prepared. For all their brilliance and resilience, the Cro-Magnon were still human, and humanity has always carried a shadow. Beneath the beauty of their art and the genius of their tools, there lies another story carved into bone, the story of conflict. Many skeletons uncovered from Ice Age Europe bear the unmistakable marks of violence. Skulls cracked by blunt blows, vertebrae cleanly sliced by stone blades, healed fractures that speak of ambushes, survived, and others that never healed at all. Some wounds were clearly accidental, born of the hunt. Others, darker and more deliberate, came from human hands. Deep within Gough's Cave in England, archaeologists uncovered a haunting scene frozen in time. Human skulls carefully shaped into bowls. Long bones split lengthwise, scraped clean, the marrow removed as if it were meat. The remains belong to men, women and children, people who once shared the same icy world. To some, it was a ritual of reverence, an attempt to keep the spirits of the dead close. To others, it was a grim act of desperation when hunger tore through the fragile boundaries of morality. Modern researchers still debate what truly happened there. Was it survival, cannibalism, ritual practice, or both? The evidence refuses to give a simple answer. But what it reveals without question is that even our earliest ancestors walked the narrow edge between necessity and cruelty. The Ice Age did not just forge muscle and ingenuity, it tested the soul. Yet this darkness does not diminish them, it defines them. Because the Cro-Magnon were not gods sculpted in perfection. They were people bound by the same moral struggles we face today. In their bones we see both compassion and violence, care and fear, love and hunger intertwined. To understand them is to understand ourselves, creatures capable of great mercy yet driven at times to terrible extremes. Even in the Ice Age, humanity had a shadow, and from that shadow light was born, the light of awareness, of conscience, of choice. It is the light that still guides us, reminding us that civilization began not when we learned to hunt, but when we began to question what it means to be human. For centuries, we imagined the story of Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal as a tale of conquest, one species rising, the other fading into extinction. But the truth written not in myth but in DNA is far more complex. Did they destroy one another, or did they become one? Around 45,000 years ago, the frozen valleys of Europe were home to both. Neanderthals had ruled those lands for hundreds of thousands of years, masters of endurance, masters of the cold. Then came the newcomers, taller, leaner, carrying new tools, new languages of thought. For nearly 5,000 years, the two species lived side by side. Sometimes they fought for territory, sometimes they shared it. They hunted the same beasts, walked the same trails, and in time their worlds began to merge. One discovery changed everything: the remains of a Cro-Magnon found in a cave in Romania known as Oazi 1. When scientists unlocked his genetic code, they uncovered a revelation. 9% of his DNA was Neanderthal. That means his grandfather, or perhaps his father, was one of them. This wasn't distant ancestry. It was family. Flesh and blood intertwined across species lines beneath the frozen auroras of prehistory. So perhaps the Neanderthals were not conquered at all. Perhaps they were absorbed, their strength, their resilience, their knowledge living on within the people who came after. Every modern human outside Africa still carries between 1 and 2% of Neanderthal DNA, a quiet reminder that the line between us and them was never clean. They were rivals, yes, but also kin. And in their union, something greater was born, a hybrid of intellect and endurance, empathy and strength. The Cro-Magnon did not merely inherit the earth, they inherited each other, and through that merging of bloodlines, they became what we now call human. After tens of thousands of years battling ice and hunger, the Cro-Magnon did something extraordinary. They began to imagine. Inside their skulls, which averaged more than 1,500 cubic centimeters, the brain pulsed with new possibilities. The frontal lobes, where planning, empathy and vision take root, were larger than our own. The occipital lobes, where sight and memory intertwine, bloomed with detail. These weren't minds built only for survival. They were minds built for wonder. In the flickering light of fire on the walls of caves deep beneath the earth, they painted life itself. Horses in full gallop, mammoths with tusks curving like moons, bison leaping through shadows. The caves of Lascaux in France still hold their breath, every stroke of ochre, every carved line, a heartbeat from 40,000 years ago. Nearby, someone shaped ivory from a mammoth's tusk into the small, delicate form of a woman, the Venus of whole fells, a symbol of creation, fertility, and awe. These were not random doodles of primitive minds. They were messages to the unseen, attempts to capture time, to remember, to feel. Music, too, was born in that darkness. Flutes carved from bird bones, drums stretched with hide buzzing discs that sang when spun in air. The Cro-Magnon did not just see the world, they gave it voice. For the first time, sound became meaning and rhythm became memory. And it didn't stop at cave walls. They painted their bodies with red ochre, marked their skin with tattoos, hung shells and teeth around their necks. Each mark, each color, each ornament told a story of tribe, of love, of loss. This was identity awakening, the first flicker of what it meant to be someone. They were not beasts painting walls. They were minds awakening. Each brush of pigment, each note of music was an act of defiance against the silence of the Ice Age, a declaration that even in a world of cold and darkness, the human spirit could create light. When we look at those ancient paintings today, we aren't just seeing their world, we're seeing the first reflection of ours. The moment when instinct became imagination and survival gave birth to civilization. Even in an age of ice and terror, the Cro-Magnon found a way to build home. Across the windswept plains of Eastern Europe, long before the first cities ever rose, they shaped the bones of giants into sanctuaries. In what is now Ukraine, archaeologists uncovered the remains of vast circular structures made from the ribs and skulls of mammoths. The frames were layered with animal hides packed with earth and grass to seal in warmth. Fires burned at the center, their smoke drifting through carefully placed vents carved into the ceiling of bone. Around those fires, families slept, cooked, crafted tools, and told stories. These were not crude shelters. They were the first blueprints of community designed, organized, alive. Each dwelling spoke of something greater than survival. It spoke of planning, cooperation, and trust. To gather enough bones from beasts that size required not just strength but teamwork and memory. The same hands that carved weapons also built homes, and in those homes, something new began to take shape: society. They no longer wandered endlessly. They returned to the same sites, season after season, rebuilding, improving, staying a little longer each time. It was the birth of belonging, and in the flicker of that firelight they found companionship beyond their own kind. In a burial site in Bonn, Germany, archaeologists discovered the remains of a man, a woman, and a dog laid to rest together over 14,000 years ago. The animal showed early signs of domestication: shorter snout, loyal eyes, frozen in time. This was not a tool or trophy. It was family. Together, they hunted, guarded, endured the night. The bond between human and dog forged in the Ice Age would echo for eternity. They didn't just build shelters. They built belonging, a place where love, loyalty, and memory could survive the cold long after the fire died. From the frozen silence of the Ice Age to the noise of our modern world, one truth remains unchanged. The story of the Cro-Magnon is the story of us. They began as survivors clinging to life in a land of endless winter. But they did not stop at survival. They learned, they built, they dreamed. From hunters in the snow, they became artists of stone and bone. From scattered tribes, they became the first communities. From mere endurance, they discovered meaning. Every step they took carved the path we now walk. The tools in their hands became the foundation of our technology. The songs they sang in the dark became the first echoes of human culture. The art they painted beneath flickering torchlight became our first memory proof that even surrounded by death and cold, the human spirit could create beauty. They did not vanish when the ice retreated. They became the architects of everything that came after. Inside each of us flows a quiet inheritance, the strength of their muscles, the fire of their minds, and the compassion that kept them alive. The same genes that once helped them endure the Ice Age now shape our hands, our faces, our hearts. Every invention, every act of courage, every dream we chase is an echo of their ancient defiance against extinction. The Cro-Magnon never disappeared. They simply changed form. They are written in our bones, in our blood, in the stories we still tell around the glow of another kind of fire, the one that burns behind our eyes. So when you look back across the endless timeline of history, remember we are not far removed from those who walked through ice and shadow. Their endurance became our progress. Their hope became our civilization. If this story moved, you join us as we keep exploring the untold past. Like, subscribe, and travel with us deeper into the world that made us who we are. Because their fire never died. It burns in us every time we dream, create, and survive.